Salvete, Latin force. Oh, you guys, I can't wait to see you in person. And I've been thinking hard about how we're going to do this virtual Latin, and I think I've got some pretty good ideas. I did put a question in the stream asking what you guys would be interested in looking at this year, and Patricia wrote back right away with variety. Let's read poetry and prose and silly things and interesting things and weird things and have a big mix of what we look at. And what I want to say is, you guys, there is no risk of me suddenly becoming focused. Don't worry. I'm going to be super distracted. We'll do silly things, but also hopefully read some good Latin literature this year. For today, I'm going to start us off with some nuts and bolts grammar review. I think it'll be important for us to go through review of Latin grammar, make sure we've got it all solid, and spend, maybe 10 or 15 minutes a week reviewing what the grammar is. And I'm just going to take you through the whole thing. So today, nouns. Let's go to the whiteboard. All right, guys, buckle in, because I'm going to go quickly, give you a thorough grammar review. All right, nouns. What's the definition? Persona, locus, res. Got it. Person, place, thing. On, concilium, an idea. You guys know all this stuff. Now, the nouns in Latin are broken up into how many different declensions? 5 declensions. And then in each declension, we have the endings for all the different cases. How many cases? We're going to do 7 and get them all knocked out. So those cases, nominative. Use it for subject and a predicate nominative. Next case, genitive. Let's say for today, possession. There are other genitive uses. There's a genitive of price. There's a genitive of description. There's a genitive of the whole. I can go into those details later, but genitive usually is going to be translated in English with the preposition of. Next we have dative case for the indirect object. And we also see the dative pronouns getting used very often to show possession. So I might say like, calamus est mihi. And I recently learned, anytime we talk about a body part, we don't use the adjective my, we use the I to me. So I could say like, oh, oculus mihi hodie nocet. And it's true, my eye does kind of hurt today. I got a little sty in there. So the dative, but though the dative is going to be indirect object with verbs of give, show, and tell. So I give it to you, I show it to somebody, I tell it to somebody. Next, accusative. You're already thinking this. It's the direct object. It gets used with prepositions. And it's also used for the subject of indirect statement. Remember we did those sentences where you say like, Mr. Stout said that, and then you're an indirect statement. The subject uses the accusative case. Moving along, ablative case for prepositions. And then there's also the ablative absolute, is when you just put words in the ablative case in order to quickly convey an idea. So if I want to be like, with all the students finally sitting down in the classroom, school began. I could just go, discipulis omnibus in schola, or discipulis omnibus sedentibus, with all the students sitting, incipit schola, school starts. All right, the two others that are rarer but important, you got vocative for direct address. That's when I'm going to say like, oh, Marcus, I'd say, oh, Marque. Or if I want to say, oh, Julia, I'd say, oh, Julia. And don't forget the important rule. If a man's name ends with I-U-S, like Cornelius, it changes to Corneli. And if the guy's name was Pupius, his vocative, when you talk to him, you would say, salve, o, pupi. We call that one the pupi rule. Finally, locative. And you can see locus in there is for places. And so if you want to say, I live in Rome, you could say in Roma, ablative case, or you could say, Habito, I live. Romai, in the locative case. Locative almost always looks just like the genitive. The locative is used for cities, towns, and islands smaller than the island of Crete. When I say I live in Colorado, sometimes I use the ablative, habito in Colorado, but I can also say habito colorati. And we figure Colorado is not so big that we can't use the locative case. I switch them up. That's the case system. The endings. Do you need to memorize all of these endings? Yes, you need to have all of these endings memorized. When we do all 5 declensions, and we'll skip the vocative and locative for them, it's going to be 50 endings. So let's blast through them as quickly as I can. And you guys, maybe you want to chant them and memorize them, write them down a few times. That Scorpio Martianus guy, the bald dude who sings those songs, he says write everything out by hand 40 times and you won't forget it. I don't know if I want to go there, but all right. First declension. Do you have to memorize the macrons? Yeah. Second. Remember, second declension also has a neuter option. And so then it would be ah. Think of English words that came from Latin in second declension. Spiny, in the desert, doesn't need much water. 1, cactus. 2, cacti, or we'd say cacti, right? Also, when you are collecting scientific information, one piece is a datum, and all of it together is the data. That's why we say the data show. The datum shows. Let's go on to third declension. Now in the nominative case, the third declension, we just say that it varies because there's a lot of different patterns. So I'm going to put varies. Third declension is the most common. It has the most nouns in it. It also has neuter forms. And so if it varies in the nominative, it varies in the accusative. In the plural, it's going to change to and Notice second declension neuters end in the plural in Third declension also ends in Okay, fourth declension. Fourth declension is really fun to say. Fourth declension goes us, ui, oo, us, ibis, ibis. Fourth also has a neuter, even more fun to say. Us, ibis, ibis. So.
Let's get this one. Us, genitive, us, long, ui, us, ibis, ubis. Us, ibis, ubis.
Cool kids would use ubis. What's a good example of a fourth declension noun? How about the bow? Arcus. Arcus, arcus, arcui, arcum, arcu. Arcus, arcuum, arcubus. Arcus, arcubus. It's pretty fun. Neuter variation. Almost done, guys. Hang in there. Fifth declension's all that's left. And I learned fifth declension by declining the word thing, race. Res, rei, rem, re, res, rerum, rebus, res, rebus. So the endings go. Rosa, rosai, rosai, rosam, rosa, rosai, rosarum, rosis, rosas, rosis. Puer, pueri, puero, puerum, puero, pueri, puerorum, pueris, pueros, pueris. The third, mater, matris, matri, matrim, matre, matres, matrum, matribus, matres, matribus. I did a fourth, I did a fifth. There's all your declensions. What do you need to memorize? Well, by the end of the year, you ought to be able to reproduce these charts. It's a helpful thing to be able to do. But for now, if you can spot patterns, that's going to be most helpful. Notice, for example, the abus, ubus, ibus, is, is. That's happening. Notice also arum, orum, erum. Similar sounds that repeat. Notice also in the ablative singular, always a long a, o, e, e. There are patterns that these will help you figure out what case a noun is in when you encounter it in a sentence. Now, go write this out 40 times. Nah, we'll figure out some way to do a quiz over it next week. That's all the grammar for today. Thanks for staying in there. Walete.